the best advice I've gotten about writing is one, to write what I'm most afraid to write about. I think often there's this tip that's given, which is like, write what you know, which I think is true. It's like to tap into who you are and what you know. But I also think sometimes we don't emancipate ourselves to write what we know. And I think often I was afraid as a Black woman, as a low-income woman, as a woman with a disability, to write about that experience. I was afraid to lay those truths bare. And so particularly when I first began writing, all of my stories were about, very specifically, a white girl with blue eyes and specifically auburn hair. And that's a great look if you've got it. I don't. And after a while, particularly in middle school, I had to free myself to say, it's not only okay, but there is something incredibly, impactful about me writing about a dark-skinned Black girl, because I'm not seeing stories like that. And if anyone is going to write that, why not me? Why not now? Why not this? I always wanted to be a songwriter. And so I was just writing songs, but like not singing them and speaking them. And that was my poems. And then I had a really informative mentor who looked at me and she was like, you know what? Your poems don't have to rhyme. And your poems can actually be even more challenging when you write them and they don't rhyme. And so I spent a few years actually breaking away from kind of that songwriting background that I had and thinking about just writing kind of in a more prosaic way, we would say. But recently, I think a lot of my poetry has returned to rhyme and to rhythm, not necessarily because I think that's the only option that there is, but because it's the option that speaks with the most excitement and electricity to me. Writing is, I think, definitely the process of being stuck, but having, the will to move forward. I think about the Greek myth of like Sisyphus, who's like pushing this stone up a hill forever and ever. And whenever he gets to the top, it rolls back down. He has to begin again and push it up the hill and start again. I really think that's the process of writing. You have to create, I think, a routine and a willingness that is conducive to you creating in all types of scenarios. So for me, that's making sure that I'm pushing myself to write every day. And sometimes what I put down isn't even logical. I'm writing the alphabet. I'm writing random sounds. I'm writing the noises that I hear outside. And there's a lot of conversations that happen beneath my window because I'm in an apartment. So they're not great diatribes of poetics, but I'm at least writing. And I think to celebrate that, putting your pen to paper, that is enough. You have to be okay, I think, with sitting down and recognizing that you're not trying to write something great in this moment. You're trying to write, and the greatness will come in itself from that. I think it's, to use 826 words, a great time to write. And I don't necessarily mean that in the, I would say, the capitalist sense of now is a good time to write something to sell and then, make a product, which is great. I mean, live your best publishing life. But I think thinking of writing as a form of healing, as a form of community building is where emphasis should be first. And I think it's in times where we feel physically remote and distant that writing can both bring us together, but also kind of reveal the blessings of being alone and having, in the words of Virginia Woolf, especially a woman, to have a room of one's own. I'm reminded of what I would call the historicity of people writing during times of great distress and isolation. So I'm thinking of Martin Luther King writing a letter from a Birmingham jail in which he's in prison, but still finds the spirit to write this gorgeous letter about racial injustice in America. I'm thinking about Anne Frank hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam, and the one thing that she compels herself to do is write in her journal and to document her life. I'm thinking about Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades in South Africa, writing and rereading Shakespeare. So we have a really, I think, strong legacy of writers being the ones who, in times of isolation, times of distance, times of suffering, remind us of the best of humankind. And I don't think it has to come from someone who's known as, let's say, Maya Angelou, Nelson Mandela was a Nelson Mandela before he was Nelson Mandela, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know that was all over the place, but
Not
even
at all.
from obscurity and even from shadows, you can still write your story and have your voice heard in its own way.